Mhm. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another great episode of Crushing Strongholds. This is a place where we get to turn pain into power and trauma into triumph, and a place where we get to just expose the lies of the enemy. And today I have an amazing guest. Actually, this is part two of an episode that we had already recorded. And unfortunately, we got cut off, but I think that just left room for more. And so I'm really excited that we are back in action with a second episode in our discussion where we had so much great stuff that we were talking about. And so this lady that I'm bringing back, which you all should already know who she is because our episode already dropped. So you all should know who I'm talking about. But Jennifer Chase is back in the studio today with us, and we are going to still be talking about what Jennifer does, and that is rise up against addiction. And we have talked about that in our previous episode. And today I just want to dive back in and really get to the heart and get into some deep discussion about the actual addiction, especially with not only does Jennifer bring the professionalism, but she brings a lot of experience to the table. So, Jennifer, welcome back and thank you for joining me a second time around. I'm excited to have you.
You're so welcome. I'm so glad we get to do this again.
Yes, me too. And we had such a good conversation. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna let it go because it was too good to, to delete, if that makes
Yeah, for
sense. So
sure. Yes, for sure.
so I know in our previous conversation, our last episode, part one per se, that we did talk about a lot of our similar experiences that we both have encountered, and for yourself. And can you just give us a little bit of recap about like who you are and some of the experiences that you went through, from your mom to yourself to your child, as far as facing the addiction? Because I know when we talk about addiction, sometimes we only face addiction in one aspect. It's
Yeah.
either we're dealing with one person who has addiction, or we are addicted, or
Yeah.
or that addiction gets passed on to one of our children. And you have encountered all three of those.
Yeah.
So that experience is very um, widely appreciated because we want to kind of get down to the emotional and the complex part of it where we can dive in and dissect it to where um, how to overcome the shame. And
Yeah.
I know we were diving into that, and I think that's kind of where we left off is feeling the overwhelmingness of at least for myself. I remember bringing to the table that I felt like I just wasn't going to get through it or measure up to it because I
Yeah.
just it was just on me. It was that curse was on me. And so if you don't mind sharing with our guests, I mean our audience today, I'm sorry, that experience and just kind of dive back into, where we left off and just recap if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely feel okay doing that. So I'm the daughter of an alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic. I'm the granddaughter of an alcoholic. My grandfather was also both of my grandfathers were alcoholics, and I'm probably the great great granddaughter of an alcoholic. This system, if you will, in my family runs very deep, and most of that was alcoholism. I had a very high functioning uh, both my dad and my grandfather were incredibly successful and high functioning alcoholics, and yet it still impacted me significantly, right? Like a lot of the times I hear as a society, we minimize those that get up and go to work every day as not being as bad as alcoholics as the alcoholics that are struggling daily drinking in the morning. And the truth is, my experience is that they are just as impactful. My grandfather, again, very successful, was sexually abusing me and my cousins. And, my mom has some experience in that area. So that was another thing that's pretty common in families that are functioning in that level of addiction. Um, and then my dad, who was my guy, he was my whole world growing up. My dad was an alcoholic, and so you never quite knew what you were going to get when he walked in the door, right? Was he going to be my guy, or was he going to be intoxicated and sometimes mean, even abusive? Like you just never knew. And the message that I got very early on, based on those two relationships, was that. Uh, if I could just be something other than who I was, then my dad would be consistent or my grandfather wouldn't be hurting me. And additionally, I have a mom who is just not my person, right? If I think I probably said this to you earlier, but if I speak German, my mom speaks English. Like we
Mhm.
never spoke the same language. I was with her yesterday and we were talking about it again, and it's not something that holds any resentment or anger for me anymore. It just is the truth, right? We just don't understand one another. And so, again, another common denominator growing up as to why I was the problem. So had this childhood experience that I wasn't very lovable. I wasn't enough. I couldn't be who these people needed me to be lovable. Like that wasn't who I was authentically. And so it caused a lot of shame, right? It caused a lot of the critic inside of me being very loud. And, the traumas that I was experiencing on top of that impacted me greatly. And so, I, I, I probably shared this with you earlier too, but there was nothing, I was not going to be like them. I didn't know if I was going to be, a teacher or a doctor or if I was going to be a mom or get married, but I could tell you I was not going to be an alcoholic. Like I looked at their inability to break this generational thing as just pure weakness, and that was never going to be me. But unfortunately, life does as life does, and eventually I was introduced to opiates, and that was the beginning of my own addiction.
Wow. I can 100% relate with looking in the mirror at yourself and going, I'm not going to be that person,
Yeah.
right? And going, I'm not going to follow those footsteps. I'm going to go my own direction. And it's crazy how when we get almost pulled into it anyway because of that generational curse, it's almost like there's an attachment to it. And as much as we say that is not going to be me, that is not going to be me, it happens, and I can relate with you because again, it was me as well. And I didn't get into the opiates, but I did get into the alcohol and what have you. And even though I was more controlling it, I was like, I'm gonna control it. It's not gonna control me. There was times when it did control me. And I
Yeah.
felt like, and then I got ashamed of myself because I was like, oh, I thought I had a handle on this, and now it's got a handle on me. And then I would, give myself a little pep talk and be like, you got to get your act together. People are seeing what you're doing and you're behaving just like your mother, just like your grandfather, just like everyone else in your life. Now you're just right in the middle with them. You fit right in, right where you said you didn't want to be. And so you have to shift that gear and start focusing on the problem instead, as well as the solution. And I think that a lot of times we dwell on the shame and the abuse and the victim mentality that comes along with the abuse that we endure instead of the solution to the problem that it brought on. And a lot of people don't become alcoholics or drug addicts or addicts because of choice. Normally it's normally something that arises that causes them to go in that direction. It's usually something from their past, a trauma, a pain, whether it's abuse or neglect, or it could be, even kids in high school, they just go to a party one time and they're addicted. It could just happen so easily, and we say to ourselves, "This is not going to happen to me," and here we are, right? We're on that spectrum, and we're like, okay, now
Well, and
now we're talking about us.
I think what you're talking about is a really important point, which is um, substance has never been the problem. Substance is always the solution to the problem. 100% across the board. This is true, right? Um, that I become addicted to substance or I drink alcohol. I say this a lot when I do public speaking, and when I went to college, again with the mindset that I was never going to become an alcoholic, I would drink more, binge drinking, but I started to put a connection together that if I drink more, I'll be less anxious. If I drink more, this boy will like me. If I drink more, I will be funnier, right? Like substance was the solution to something even back then, right? A lot of people that have ADD use substance to quiet the mind. People that have social anxiety use substance to be able to fit in social situations. Like substance is always the solution to something, and we aren't going to be able to stop using it until we start finding new coping skills to deal with the actual problem, right? Like some of us have biology. We have like biology to dealing with addiction, but when you have biology, 9 out of 10 times, you also have the trauma, right? And you also have the shame. And it's like a perfect world. It's a perfect storm of learning to use substance as a solution when you not only have the biology, but you also have the shame.
Exactly. Thank you for summing that up. You spit that out way better than where I was trying to go with it, and it makes sense because this is what you do. You know, you're a Rise Addiction life coach, and so it's awesome that you can um, get in and explain exactly, you know, that breakdown, that how that works. And I think like for myself personally that with drinking, because that was, you know, my vice. And yeah, I did the cigarettes and I tried like marijuana, and I did get addicted to a pain medication. I don't remember if you remember, it's no longer on the market. I think it was called Darvocet,
Yeah.
after a surgery. I got really
Yeah.
addicted to
It was
that.
supposed to be like a not as strong opiate.
Yeah. Oh, it was my go-to though. I would go in, I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm hurting. Can I have Darvocet?" You know, like it directly, not, "Can
It's
I have
more like
something for pain?"
tramadol now. More like tramadol
Yes.
now. They're kind of the same. Yeah.
And tramadol is so bad.
Yeah.
It's so bad. It's so bad for people with dementia because it actually causes dementia.
Yeah.
So, people aren't even aware that, you know, what some of these, you know, drugs do.
Yeah.
In the pharmaceutical world, we think, well, as long as a doctor prescribes it, it's probably going to be good or it's going to be
Yeah.
useful or helpful, and it's not really necessarily the
I'm here to
case.
report that is not always the case.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
100%. It's not the case. And I always encourage people, you know, to read the fine print when you get any prescription. Do your research on it because I did go through a period where I had some medications after a surgery that I had that I literally was like, I felt like I had Tourette syndrome. I was shaking and I couldn't
Mhm.
hold a coffee cup. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, something's wrong with me. And I was like, this is not normally me. And I became an introvert, and I'm a social butterfly. Like, I was like, everything was opposite of the person that I was. And I started reading the, on the medications that the doctor had me on. He had me on like 7 different prescriptions because of the physical issue I was dealing with. And I went to him and I said, I am no longer taking any of these. And he's like, I don't recommend that. And I said, well, I don't recommend taking it because now I have all these other symptoms that I have to figure out how to get rid of. And I know they're the cause of it. Everything that I read is exactly what I'm dealing with. And I said, and I'd rather have whatever this other symptom is than all of these other symptoms. And I got myself off from all 7 of those prescriptions, and totally the doctor did not agree with me, and he was not very happy with me. And I said, well, it's really not going to be your choice. I'm not going to take it. And within a month, I was almost back to normal. And I went back to him and I said, look how much better I am. I got off all of that garbage.
Yeah.
So we don't, you know, sometimes when we're relying on our physician and our doctors and whatever, and sometimes medications are necessary. I think that they are necessary for certain things, but we just got to be really, really careful because again, it can lead to that addiction to where we end up craving it. We, you know, we can't get away from it, and what have you. And same with alcohol. Like now that I don't drink like I used to, definitely at all. I have a glass of wine here and there, but I don't like to, go out and socialize. My life doesn't revolve about around drinking to have social activity in it anymore. And that used to be a real thing for me because of the anxiety. So I know you can relate with that anxiety. Like you said, you know, trying to, you know, impress someone or trying to fit in or whatever. If drinking was the way to get to it, then that's what got you to it, you know. But with your coaching and what you do, as I was reading through your program, I love how, you know, how you dive in and you start with like the growth and the connection, and then I love that you emphasize that um to live, because a lot of times we're not really living when we're in addiction. We're just barely getting by. We think we're living, but we're really not. We don't realize what we're missing out on. when we are trapped in that addiction. So can you touch base on that and like kind of break those down a little bit if you don't mind, and let's share with our listeners like um, some of the things that you do in order
Yeah,
to help
absolutely.
people.
So when I got sober, about 18 months after I got sober, I went and worked for an outpatient program that is in my town. And it was the one that I went through. It's a faith-based program that I was able to reconnect my relationship with God, and it was a program that meant a lot to me. And I worked there for about 6 years and became part of the executive team there. And the last year or so that I was there, I just kept feeling this pull. Um, and that pull for me is my higher power, right? That pull
Yeah.
for me is God. And what I was hearing was, Jennifer, we didn't walk through this, and you haven't worn all of these hats to just work with the addict. And not that that's not very important, right? But there are a lot of resources for people that are attempting to get sober themselves, right? And resources that are fairly easy to find in a community, right? And I realized that what isn't as readily available is how to help the families navigate this thing, right? Because you and I both know that um, the dynamic, the dance floor, I call it, of our family can contribute to the longevity or the characteristics of this dance. And what that means when I got sober and I got off this, if you consider that your family waltzes, I think my family waltzed. And I probably at a very early age, probably 10 to 12, I realized that I absolutely despised the dance of waltz, but everybody was doing it, right? And so I thought I was the one that was broken because I didn't like to waltz. And, 30 some years later, when I got sober and got off that dance floor, I realized that it's like I cannot waltz. Like there's only one way I'm going to waltz on this dance floor with everybody, and that is high.
Yeah.
I cannot get sober and get back on your dance floor and start doing this dance again with all of these same dynamics and toxicity and stay sober, right? Because again, that dance floor was part of my problem. Substance was the solution. And so what I realized is like, okay, if we're gonna, and this became like more of a, even when I got married and had kids, we kind of fell into the waltz. And so what I realized once I got sober that it was like waltzing doesn't work for me. So if this family of mine, if we want to figure this out, right? If this, because again, I want to say this, like not all relationships should make it out of addiction. I want people to hear that, right? Not all relationships should make it out of addiction. But if yours is to, or your family is to heal, then what is required is that we all get off of this waltzing dance floor and we learn a new dance that works for everybody, where everybody can be honest and authentic, and that we're not rescuing and enabling and we're not toxic, right? And it's a lot of work. And what I started to learn was that a lot of the families, when this starts, we want to blame the addict for all of it.
Hmm.
We want to blame them if they'll just stop drinking and get back on this dance floor, like the way everyone else is doing it, we'll be fine. And that is just not facts. It is just not the truth. Um, and so the work that I started to doing is really focusing on the loved ones, really focusing on figuring out why or how they have contributed to the longevity of one's addiction. Again, I want to say this very, very loud. We are not responsible for somebody's use. We did not contribute to it. We did not create this disease for somebody else, right? Not as mamas. If you're a mama listening to me right now, it is not your fault that your child ultimately has become an addict. But let me tell you what we can contribute to. We can contribute to the longevity of this thing,
Hmm.
right? And none of us none of us want to be contributing to the longevity of this thing. We want this thing to be over as quickly as possible. We are in hell, right? But we inadvertently, because of the dance floor, have contributed to the longevity of this. So, my role now is to figure out how do we find our own peace, whether our addicted loved one ever gets sober a day in their life. And it's possible. If you just heard me say that and you think this lady is crazy, I promise you it is possible to find peace if your loved one ever gets sober or not. We can figure out how we have contributed to the longevity of it and stop doing those things, right? We can't control an outcome. We can't force somebody to do things, but we can make choices and change things in our lives that can maybe make that happen quicker.
Mhm.
Right? And then a lot of what I do, I have modeled over what it felt like to get sober from substance. And you've heard this before, but the opposite of addiction is connection, right? The opposite of addiction is connection. Substance isn't the problem, substance is the solution to the problem. And a lot of times the problem is isolation and lack of connection and shame and all of those things that pull us into this dark space. And so that is also true for family members. If you're a mama listening to me right now and you're like, I can't go out to lunch with my friends anymore because if I hear how fantastic their college age child is doing and how they're going to become a doctor or a lawyer, and my child I'm trying to keep from being homeless and out of jail. Like we have nothing in common anymore, right? Those scenarios become very, very, very isolating.
Mhm.
Not different from what it feels like from an addict's perspective. And see, I have both perspectives, right? I have the addict's perspective because I've walked through this, but I also am a mama of somebody that has walked this. And so I have both of those perspectives and understand that we are way more alike than we are different when we're talking about our addicted loved one and ourselves. And so one of the things that has become so important is creating this connection and this camaraderie, if you will, with like-minded people that have loved ones that suffer with addiction. Um, and it will be my life work, really. I've kind of passed the baton and said, I know people that are doing and getting in the trenches with the addicts, and they're doing a fantastic job. And I know where to like be a resource for those people, but there are very few resources for the family.
Wow. And sometimes I think that, like you said, um, we don't look at that. We
Yeah,
don't look at that picture. We
yeah,
we 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 separate ourselves from that exact very thing that needs to take place. And in order for the healing to come, it has to be a connection. It has to be a
yeah,
connective thing because as much as we need to like only not only forgive ourselves for walking in our own addiction or feeling like we've caused one of our loved ones to walk in addiction. I've heard people say in the Bible also says it, try not to um, cause someone to stumble. And I
yeah,
think when we read that scripture, when we're addicts, we think, "Oh my gosh, we've caused so many people to stumble because of our own demise," and so we step back from that connection and we disconnect. And
yeah,
like you said, we isolate. And I find that in that isolation, when I'm isolated, and I'll just say this truthfully for anyone that's listening, when I used to isolate to an extreme level, I didn't isolate alone. I isolated with a bottle, by the way.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry to say it, but
And
that
maybe it
was my
didn't start
connection,
that way. Maybe it
you
didn't
know.
start that way, but it always ends that way.
And I would do it privately because I didn't want to hear the chatter. I didn't want to hear what people were saying, or if I made a fool of myself. I mean, there's a few times that I thought I had control. That when I was losing that control, and I started making stupid errors and just making a complete idiot of myself. And because it was more than a couple of drinks, it was two or three extra drinks, and I thought I had a handle on it, and it had a handle on me, and it was making me look like an idiot. Is what it was doing. So, and then people would point it out, and then I'd be, you're embarrassed, you're ashamed, you want to just go crawl back in your hole, and you can't seem to find any other vice other than the one that you're trying to run from. is the one that you're still hanging on to. And I found that for myself many, many times. And I finally came to the conclusion when I was honest with my oldest daughter. And she's like, Mom, you don't drink that much. And I said, You're not around me that much
Mm.
when it comes to that because I isolated myself in it. And I said, and I'm talking to you about this because I want to have accountability to someone. And I know if I and my daughter means so much to me. My children mean a lot to me. And I know that they're not going to judge me because they loved me no matter what. And they always have. And I knew that I could actually go and talk to my oldest, especially, and my middle daughter about it. And they, even my daughter's like, but Mom, you don't drink that much. And I said, not in front of you,
Mm.
And I mean, and finally, when I started saying these things, they started realizing, oh yeah, there's a lot of isolation, isolation, isolation.
Yeah.
Where's mom? Where's mom? And so I had to come out of my room. I had to come out of the closet and stay out of there
Yeah.
and not allow myself to go back into that hole in order to regain that separation between me and the bottle, basically. And I started connecting with my daughter, and my daughter's like, okay, let's start doing things together. I said, I need to do things together with you because if not, I'm just going to go isolate. And she's like, Mom, I didn't realize this was really a problem. I didn't, because I was able to maintain a certain level of being a parent. You show up for work, you get the job done, the house is clean, the laundry's done. When you are functioning in it, it's not necessarily as recognizable as when you're not functioning. Like you said in the very beginning,
Yeah.
you said
Yeah.
it perfectly clear. And um, we think often, well, as long as I'm functioning, then I'm not that bad
Yeah.
until you get that bad, until it goes from one drink to three drinks to five drinks to an entire bottle. And then you're going back to the store for more, or you're trying to get more. You're having it delivered. I actually had wine delivered. I didn't know the grocery store could deliver wine on DoorDash, right? And I was like, that was a bad thing to find out,
Yeah.
because I could be really discreet. I didn't have to go in public to even get a bottle of wine. I just have it delivered. And I was like, no, and so I had to get rid of DoorDash because it was a problem.
Yeah.
And recognizing that it was a problem was the best thing that God helped me do. And so I felt with that being honest with, even if it was just one person, you have to be honest with one person. And God counts, but he doesn't count. And I only say this because of this. God already knows. God sees
Yeah.
all. So it's not that we can't go to God, we can, but God is going to give us that free will to decide what we want to do with it. Where if you go to an actual person, especially someone that you're close to, and you confide in them your honest to God truth about what you're hiding in the closet, it allows you to be more accountable to somebody other than yourself and just running it to God and going like, oh God, you already know this, but you know what? Oh,
Yeah.
God, it's okay, God, I'm going to you. So as long as I'm going to you, it's okay. You need to find, like you said, the connection. And I think that's so important in order for even the growth or the ability to live it out, whether, you get completely free from the addiction or not. And I know some people say, I was addicted for 10 years. I can't even smell or touch or look at a drop of alcohol because I will dive right back in to the deepest pit with it. And then there's people that I know, like myself, where I don't no longer do the binge drinking and the just doing it to medicate myself. I do it on occasional, like if I have dinner, I'll have a glass of wine.
Mhm.
And I know my limit and I don't go past the limit. I'm like, okay, you're allowed two glasses of wine, that's it, you're done, and then
Yeah.
that's it. And some people I've talked to say that there's no way I could do that. So can you touch base on that at all where like because there are differences in people I know where people absolutely have to restrain 100%. And you probably would recommend that, I would assume in your profession, but what do you think?
Well, for me, like I'm not an alcoholic, but I don't drink. And the reason I don't drink is because I, so I was thinking like, well, most of us, and I don't know about you, but most of us don't love the out taste of alcohol. We don't, the first time we didn't drink alcohol, we were like, oh my God, that is the greatest tasting thing I've ever experienced in my life, right? And so for me, if I drink alcohol, then it's probably because I'm wanting to feel something different, right? I'm wanting to like take the edge off. I'm wanting to just relax. I'm wanting and for me, from my addict brain, that is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I put substance, a mind altering substance in my body, then it just opens up a vault, right? If I'm going to get high on opiates, it's probably after I've had a few drinks, even though I'm not an alcoholic, right? Um, and I live in a place now where today it's like I don't want anything to change my, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, like my being okay and dealing with life on life's terms, like that doesn't use substance. And I think you're right. I think there are people that are able to do that. I'm not that kind of girl, right? I'm the kind of girl that it's like I'm an addict. I was just having this really funny conversation. I'll tell you a really funny story real quick. I came downstairs the other night. It was literally 2 nights ago, and I said to my husband, "If I ever forget that I'm an addict, let me just tell you a few stories." So, gotten really into skincare lately, right? And bought all of this skincare and trying to start new a retinol, if you know what that is.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, when you start it, do it like once like twice a week. That's it, and don't do it day to day, right? And your skin get used to it. Well, what do I do? Because I'm an addict, right? I go 3 days back to back to back because if twice a week is good. Once every day is fantastic. And my face was on fire.
Oh, no.
And I walked downstairs and I was like, don't ever question if I'm an addict or not, right? It's the mindset, it's the way that I think. If two is good, six is better. If once every other day is good, once every day is better, right? Like it's just the mindset that I have. And so for me, it cannot be part of my life anymore unless I want to go back to burning it all down, right? And it probably wouldn't happen the first night I drank or even the third night that I drank, but I would ever so slightly get closer to burning it all down again, right? And I think for some of us that are like that, we have kind of, again, that perfect storm that I'm talking about, which is the biology, the trauma, the shame, all of the things that, as you know, are going to be life work. Shame is a life work job, right? I've been sober for 9 years coming up next week, and there are still days where I wake up buried by shame. It is going to be my life work. And so sometimes when we have all of these sort of colliding issues in our life, substance is just something that I just personally cannot play with.
Right. I love that you touched base on that because you recognize it though. You see
Yeah.
it for yourself. And sometimes I think people don't see it for themselves until, it's like that deer in headlights moment. Like until they
Yeah.
have that epiphany, that exact moment that gets a hold of them, they don't see it.
Well, and
And
not only do they not see it, and oftentimes it takes a relapse. It
yeah,
takes it takes I'm going to drink like a gentleman or a gentle lady, right? And that was my mindset when I started this. My mindset when I started this was how do I get my tolerance down? How do I get so many drugs out of the house? How do I use like a gentle lady? How do I stop embarrassing my family? Right? It was never abstinence was not the goal. And knock on wood, I have not relapsed, but I have been able to see in myself this addict behavior, right? Like I don't need to take substance to see that my mindset is this addict behavior. But for a lot of people, they get sober the first time and they're like, oh no, I'm just going to drink one beer at dinner with my friends. And they take that one beer and they're now in jail for a DUI.
mhm,
And there is no like calm
yeah,
once substance starts. And so oftentimes it does take repeated attempts to drink like a gentleman or to use like a gentle lady in order to realize that that's just not in the cards.
yeah. I can totally see what you're saying with that. I think like when we take the one drink and it leads to the multiple drinks, And sometimes we think, oh, I'm just going to drink one. Oh, I'll just drink two, or I'll just, and then they just keep
Yeah.
adding up, and then next thing you know, you've drank too much,
Yeah.
and then the next day you go back to the drawing board and you're just completely ashamed of yourself. You're like, wait, I told myself I was not going to do this. Why did I
Yeah.
allow myself to do this? And then
Yeah.
you're just totally just destroying yourself, your
Yep.
self-esteem, who
Burning
you
it all
are,
down.
all
Yep.
of it up, and yeah, been down that road 1,000 times. And I remember asking, I actually went to a physician and I asked the physician, I said, why is it that sometimes I could go months and months and months and months without a drink? And then sometimes I will just crave it. And I actually like the taste of some alcohol, but not a lot of alcohol. Like I don't like a lot of beers. I only specific drinks do I really like, but I will go and get those specific drinks because I know that I like them. They taste good to me. Um, but I also, when I go to the store and I buy stuff, I want to make sure that I only get a small amount and not a large amount. And then, I don't believe in drinking and driving. So either you get what you're going to drink, or, and that's it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't buy the whole store out. So that way, in case you decide you want a little more, it's available to you. So I had to
Yeah.
put all, I had to go through these steps of thinking about how am I going to do these things to do them, because I wanted that feeling that I still had control over it,
Yeah.
even though sometimes I wouldn't have the control. And I would see that I was like, oh man, really, I did this again and whatnot. And
Um, you're speaking about something that I think is so important because it's this idea that I want to be able to control my life, right? And again, I go back to these specific things, which is trauma, shame, right? Where often many of us were in some part of our lives, whether it's childhood or something that happened later in life, which made us feel powerless, right? Where people had power over us and we had no control over our own life. And from into adulthood, we have this mindset that I'm going to control all of this. I'm going to control what I drink or don't drink. I'm going to control who's in my life. I'm going to control outcomes because that makes me safe, right? I'm going to control. And what I learned early on in my inpatient treatment was that that was the biggest misinformation of all of it, right? Because the what was required for me to actually get control, if you will, back in my life is understanding that I had no control, right? Understanding that I surrendered this thing to to what I call God, and that I was completely powerless, and that understanding of powerlessness is what created some sense that I'm going to be safe and I'm in control, right? People ask me all the time, like, which part of this has been the hardest for you, whether it's being the child of an alcoholic or the addict themselves or a mama. And I would tell you with 100% certainty right now, 10 toes down, that the hardest thing I've ever walked through is being a mama of an addict. And it goes back to this idea that you and I are just talking about, which is control, right? I have control today. Control. I'm doing
yep.
quotations for any of you that aren't seeing me. Control to do today in my life what's going to help me stay sober tomorrow. Right? The coping skills that I have learned that enables me to live the life that I have today, a sober life where I'm happy and at peace and have serenity and all those things, right? I have control today to do those things that's going to keep me sober tomorrow. I have no control over what my son chooses to do today, right? None. And I think it's harder to walk through that with, as mamas, it's like this exposed nerve walking through the world. It's harder to experience that through him than it is actually in my own life. And I think without my faith and without that understanding that I'm not in control of this, I'm not his higher power. He has a higher power. I'm not sure how we walk through this as mamas, if I'm being honest, right? I think that is just such an incredibly um, difficult, seems like an understatement. But it's this idea of control, right? It's always this idea about control. And for those of us that have walked through hard things in our lives, controlling our life is what felt like survival.
hmm
right?
Yeah, it did.
Controlling our lives, like controlling what was happening is what felt like survival. And so oftentimes that's what leads us into substance.
Yeah, and I two things I wanted to touch base with that is, how you've heard the expression, well, you're spiraling out of control. And that's
Yes.
a term that we hear so often that I think that's why we step into the realm of we have to get control.
Yeah.
Because they're like, you're just spiraling out of control. You have no control, no control. And that's another realm of failure that's thrown at us. And so then we feel like we have to grab that control, and that's the only power that we have. And I love that you touched base on the higher power, meaning God. But even when, I'll just give this to you because I know that it's so hard to watch your child have that addiction. But when you surrender your child over to God and you allow Him the control,
Yeah.
things will shift. And that is a really hard thing to do. And I've had to do that with my own son, like just surrendering him over to God. And because of the decisions and the choices that he's making, because we want to jump in there and go, no, don't do this, do this, don't do that, do this. You're not going to like the outcome. We
Yeah.
want to try to put the horse before the cart, or
Yeah.
how, or the cart before the horse. I mean, and to protect them, because that's what we do. We protect, and especially as the mama bears that we are, we're so protective of our children. And when we see them messing up and we see them making mistakes, and we want to correct them and we want to teach them and we want to show them, that, we're doing all of this um, because we love them so much. We don't want to see them go through that pain, but they are not going to learn unless they go through the walk that they're going to walk through. They have to have their own trials and tribulations. That's why God gives them to us.
I
And it may
I
look different.
I tell my clients all the time, right? I have women that sit on my couch and they're like, Jennifer, I cannot deal with him being homeless. Like I don't know what I will do if there's a snowstorm, or I don't know where he is, or I don't know if he's eating. And I will say to these women, what if that is exactly where God needs him to be to meet him?
Exactly.
What if you are, again, we're talking about as family members that we contribute to the length of this thing, right? What if that is exactly where God is going to meet him and his life is going to be transformed? But as long as you kind of get in the way, if you will, from that experience for your loved one, you are creating this longevity in this addiction, right? That is actually your hell. It's keeping you up at night. You've never been more heartbroken. And yet you're contributing to the length of this thing because we have so much fear. And I want to say this, I believe so, and this is so important. We cannot have faith and fear at the same time. They can coexist moments apart from one another, but they cannot coexist at the same time. So when I'm making a decision out of fear, I use that example again. I'm paying for a hotel room, or they're living in my house, even though it is stealing every bit of peace that I have. When we are making decisions out of fear, we are never making them out of faith.
Right.
And faith is where this thing transcends. Faith is where you start seeing things changing in your loved one's life or in your life, right? And so oftentimes those decisions to allow them, and look, you're not making them homeless. You're just allowing them to go figure it out on their own. And maybe that's what they figure out. Maybe that's the path that they've taken. But but if I were to tell you with 100% certainty, no, 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 Susie, I promise you on, June 7th at 8 p.m., God is going to meet your child on the streets of Omaha, Nebraska, you would be like, we're getting them homeless in Nebraska,
Right. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
if you had the certainty, you would do it. But the
Right.
problem is we have this faith, and we have to start making decisions out of faith rather than fear.
Yeah, that is so good. I once heard, I'm trying to remember the name of the preacher, Philip Anthony, I believe, the 2819 church. I believe it was him. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on it. But he was, and he's a very powerful preacher. I love his preaching because he's direct and people say he's harsh, but sometimes we need it. But what was said was, I want something so drastic to happen to
Yes.
you that it will scare the hell out of you. And sometimes we are so busy protecting them that they're going to walk we're going to hinder them from walking out the hell that they got to get out of, and literally coming to Christ and not going to hell because they're, you know what I mean? We're protecting them from
Well,
that
and
deliverance.
I think this is so important for people that aren't addicts themselves and don't understand how our brains work. Uh, Again, I'm going to say this because again, it's so important. Substance is the solution to the problem, not the problem, right? And so the benefits of my solution I used for 14 years. The benefits were, I just can't even tell you what they were. My trauma, my nervous system was artificially regulated. I could finally, like the emotional benefits of using substance were so big, right? And if somebody's going to get sober, this is again across the board, the consequences have to start outweighing the benefits. That pendulum must switch, right? And if you have a child living at your house, they're 45 years old, their kids moved in because you don't want the kids to be, right? And
Yeah.
they're not really having to work and you're paying for their school because that is what you're trying to do. And I ask you the question, what consequences are they having right now?
Yeah, none.
That pendulum is not shifting.
Yeah.
The benefits are still outweighing the consequences. And there is not an addict on this planet that is going to get sober until that pendulum switches and the consequences start outweighing the benefits. I'll share with you the day that happened for me, the day that I found out that I had inadvertently become my son's drug dealer.
Yeah.
And that pendulum all of a sudden switched. It had to be something that significant to switch that pendulum for me because, again, the benefits of using substance, and I'm talking the emotional benefits of using substance, were so great that it took something as significant as my son in order to start that pendulum switching.
Wow. There's a lot of power in that. And thank you, by the way, for sharing that because I know, like you said, one of the hardest things was or has been is watching, your son be addicted.
Yeah.
And and again, the shame on that, feeling, that overwhelming guilt of I did this. I
Yeah.
started this. I put him on this on this road to destruction. Oh my gosh, And but I also like what you said earlier too, is like to all the moms out there, it is not your fault. Like,
No.
children, none of us came with a handbook, I always say. God did not, when we were born, here's the handbook. This is the best way to take care of this individual for
Yeah.
them to turn out the way that God designed us to turn out. Because, God just didn't equip us with that. And as parents raising our kids, we don't know, exactly, there's no perfect solution to raising a child perfectly. It's not going to happen. Children have to go through, and just like we have to go through our own demise, we have to go through our own destruction, we have to go through our own trials and tribulations in order to come out on the other side. And a person told me one time, which I thought was really interesting, but um, it was very, what's the word I'm trying to think? It boosted my morale because I didn't think about it like this. Because sometimes when we have that victim mindset, the person said, what you've gone through from birth all the way through your childhood, through all of the abuse, through all of the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the not being wanted by your parents, just a lot of stuff that I went through in my life. Um, they're like, what you went through, God allowed you to go through that because he knew you were strong enough to handle it. He would not have given you that if he already knew that you could handle it. That's why he allowed you, just like what he did with Job. He picked Job because he knew Job would be the righteousness. He would be the one to come out in the end, right where he wanted Job to come out. And I remember thinking at first, and I thought, well, I don't think that's very fair that God made me, God
Yeah.
allowed these things to happen. Like, we talked about that anger with, God. And
Yeah.
then I thought, you know what? I'm glad that God chose me to be the one that he thought was strong enough to handle it. And
Yeah.
that boosted my morale, and it made me feel like instead of down on myself, it made me realize what I had overcame.
Yeah.
And
Well,
It's
and I think
challenging.
that's important too, because I feel similarly, right? I think I've shared like I wouldn't take any of that away if
Right.
that meant me not having the life that I had today, right? And I'm a quote girl. I love quotes, and one of them that I think is really important when in this topic is by Maya Angelou, which says we do the very best until we know better, and when we know better, we do better, right? And we have to identify that if we feel that way about our own lives, that maybe there's a chance, given that we did the best that we could with what we knew, that that is also an experience that our children are having, right? And that they too might be grateful for some of the experiences that they've had in their life because it has made them who they are today. I look at my kids, and yes, I have tremendous shame about my son's addiction, and it again, shame is a life work for me, right? It is something that and not only my son's addiction, I have a tremendous shame about my daughter's childhood and how that has impacted her mental health and her into her adulthood. But what I do know is that I look at them now with such tremendous pride because they get up every single day and have the conviction to do better than they did yesterday. Both of them, right? They are always moving in a direction of trying to become better. And if I'm proud of that, then I also have to release some of the like I didn't love how they got there, but maybe that was right part of how this was all supposed to work for them too.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I like it when in Jeremiah 29:11 it says, God knows the plans for and the hope for our future. We don't
Yeah.
know what the plan is. The plan is already in place for God. It's just not, we just can't see the end of
Yeah.
the road. Our story's been written. And so, I love that scripture because sometimes when I get, if I get frustrated and I think to myself, you know what, God, I we have to let it go and we have to give it to God and be like,
Yeah.
you know what, God, you already know the future. You already have a hope for me. And I have to have that faith, like you talked about earlier. That's the faith that we have to hang on to
Yeah.
and not have the fear behind it, like you said, because that's vital. And because that's what happened to Peter. Peter, took his eyes off Jesus because he had fear. He stepped out of faith and stepped into fear for a moment and he started to sink and then went right back into faith, putting his eyes back on Jesus. And it it happens often to, everyone, we all walk through this. And there's not one person that hasn't encountered something in their life along the way. And we can talk about how it made us stronger or how it helped design us or make us who we are. And I do think that and I like also what you said. I'm not mad at my mom like I used to be. I love my mom. I honor her with every being. I miss my mom terribly now that she's gone. But there were times when I blamed my mom for everything in my life. Everything that was going wrong in my life, I blamed her instead of even taking my own accountability
Yeah.
for the things that I was causing happen for myself. And I realized that, I put a lot of pressure on my mom and I gave my mom, the runaround when I shouldn't have. She didn't deserve it anymore from the life that was given to her.
Yeah.
And, like you said, we don't get better, unless we keep trying to get better. And then as we get better, we look back on things. And there are a few things I would say I would probably redo, but I wouldn't change a whole lot because of who it has made me to be, like you
Yeah.
said. And
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think it's important that we recognize that the things that God puts us through, the outcome is who we are today. And the struggle sometimes can still be there, but I love that, like in your coaching program and stuff, like when we're starting with the growth, we can't grow um unless we end up getting watered. We've got to get planted and then we got to get watered,
Yeah.
and that's how we become fruitful. That's where we get our growth from. And so we have to sustain that. And how do we do that? We do that through the connection. We have to get connected to people that are going to help plant us where we need to be, and they're going to help water us where when we start to dry out, they're going to be like, "Hey, you need a little bit of water."
Yeah.
And instead of going back to the isolation, and that's in order to to be able to um, stay the course, stay ahead of it,
Yeah.
because it's easy. So the enemy is quick, and I've said this 1,000 times over because the enemy has been here for thousands of years and we have not. He is well trained. He knows what he's doing. And when we think we have him figured out, we don't, because he's been doing it a lot longer than we can even imagine. So
Yeah.
even when we think we have a grasp of what the enemy is trying to do to us, we're like, oh, I'm on to you, enemy. He sneaks in a different door. He sneaks in a different window, and he tries to twist you in a way to make you buckle or fold back into something that we don't want. And again, taking us back to control, where we think we have to have full control, knowing that we just reach out to God and just, talk to Jesus and say, Jesus, I just rebuke the enemy from here on out, and I'm just going to place, whatever you want in my life in your hands, Lord. I'm going to surrender all. And it's funny because it's not funny. It's important, actually, when you said that earlier, when surrendering all is what it really takes
Yeah.
on a spiritual level, on a physical level, on a mental level, on every single level, until
Yep.
you come to a point where you can surrender it all.
Yep.
It's always going to have an attachment to you if you don't surrender it all. And I love that you brought that up.
Well, and I think the important part about surrender, and I share this with so many people, like fear is natural, right? We're
Yes.
forever
Yes.
going, you're not going to be the most spiritual, connected woman and never feel fear. Like fear isn't going away,
Right.
right? It's what I do in the midst of it. And I think that that's where, I know I work with my clients when we're talking about addiction, because the only way to peace is through surrender, right? And the only way, and look, I meet people where they're at, and I do that because I was met where I was at when I started this journey, right? I was incredibly angry at God, felt like unworthy to even be in a personal relationship. And so I meet people whether they're there or whether their faith is, incredibly cemented and strong. Like there's a variation, and I love it. I think it's beautiful, quite honestly, that human experience with our faith. But at the end of the day, the only way to heal from addiction and a lot of things, whether we're talking about trauma or infidelity or marriages that don't work or whatever it is this idea of surrender. Like, I'm going to stop trying to swim upstream.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I'm going to stop this.
Good.
I think of this powerful river. We found out today that you and I live in the same place. And so I'm
Yes.
thinking about this
Yes.
river, right, that we have that's by us, that is just tons and tons and tons of water in the peak year coming down this river. And I was quite literally trying to swim up it,
Yeah.
right? By controlling people and controlling outcomes and controlling substance and controlling my son and controlling my daughter and all the things that I'm trying to control. And really, the peace didn't come until I stopped trying to swim upstream and I just released and went along. And this is true whether we're and it's true regardless of what you're trying to heal from,
Hmm.
right? Even a death,
Yeah.
even whatever it is. And that journey can be wild. It can be my journey to back to my faith was wild.
Yeah.
Took a lot of work, took a lot of patience. It took a lot of uh, people in my life that sat alongside of me as I did that work. And I respect people's own journeys in that, but we always have to get to the point. Faith or fear is always going to be present in our lives. We are human beings. It is the way we are wired. We are
Yes.
not getting away from it, right? Heartbreak, we're never getting away from it. But what happens in the midst of it is what changes the trajectory of your life.
Exactly. Um, Very well spoken. I love that. I love how you explain that whole realm of that, because it's super important. We can't run away from fear, and God gave us He gave us the fear, because we're supposed to have fear over one thing, and that's fear of God, and not fear in a way of torture or wrath, of that kind of fear, but in the end result, when it comes to salvation, we want to make sure that we understand um, what that fear actually is. And then we have the natural fear that we have, which is the fight or flight response to certain
Yeah.
things. And he gave us that because we have to, with our senses and our perception, we have to have that. So, but with all of that being said, I'm super excited that you came on today and joined me
Yeah.
again. And I really think it would be a really fun idea to get together live
Yes.
together and do a live episode.
So fun.
Um, and connect, because we are local with each other,
No,
and
it's
see kind of
crazy.
how that works out. Yeah, that would be awesome. But I am going to put all of your information in the show notes
Okay.
and whatnot. On one last note, in closing up, what piece of information can you share with our listeners today that if they are needing to reach out, um, what would be the first step that you would tell them to take in this process?
Yeah, so I think the very first thing to do is to find your people. Again, I'm talking about connection, I'm talking about isolation, right? And if you're listening to me and you have a loved one that is an addict, whether it's your spouse or whether it's your child or whoever it is, again, you know how incredibly isolating this is. So the first step is to start putting around you like-minded people so that you can begin to do this healing. One of the services that I offer is a weekly coaching call where people from all over the country join me on Tuesday evenings. And yes, it's a little bit of coaching, right? I spend about 30 minutes coaching, and then the other 30 minutes is really about this connection, about finding my people, finding my like-minded people. And that's step number one. So if you're listening to me today and you don't know where to start, if you get on my website at www.riseaddictionlc.com, there's a little part that says let's work together, and under that is a part that says contact me. And even if we're not a good fit and you don't want to work with me, if you contact me, I will help be a resource for you. And if my services don't fit for you, I'll help you find some that do, because that is step number one. Step number two is identifying that maybe I've played a part in this and I've got to figure out how I've contributed in order for this dance floor, if you will, to change.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. I love that even what you said that even if you're not a fit, you're still willing
Yep.
to help because and honestly, and in our profession, what we do, I say the same thing with my podcast. Like even if we don't connect as life coaches, I do have we have sources where we can connect people in the
Yep.
right places because we want to see people heal. We
Yep.
want to see people thrive. We want to help people be able to be the best version of who God created them to be, and
Yep.
walk in that newness of life that God wants us to have. So, again, with that, I want to say thank you so much for coming back on. I've always enjoyed our conversation. I mean, it's just great. We could talk all day, and what have you, but I don't want our episode to drop us again.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, so I've been kind of watching the clock on this one because I'm like, no, 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 we're not going to do that again. So, but yeah, let's talk after we get done recording, and try to figure out maybe a time we could get together and try to
Okay.
do a live episode. That'd be
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
and just see how it goes. But thank you, and I will put all your information in the show notes. And for all of our listeners, again, if you are dealing with any kind of addiction, just reach out to Jennifer, go to her website, and just make that connection. Just
Yeah.
pick up the phone, make a connection, and begin there. We have to
Yep.
start somewhere. It just
Yep.
takes us taking the first step, I believe. So, Jennifer, thank you again for all your wisdom and everything that you do. I love that you're helping people with addiction because it's just it's just out. There's so much of it,
Yep.
and I appreciate everything that you've brought, your experience and your own personal life experiences that you brought to the table, and I appreciate your transparency in that. And I just really enjoy talking with you. So, but I am going to let you go, and we will say
Okay.
goodbye to all of our listeners. So, everyone, take care. And again, this is Crushing Strongholds. So, if you have any questions or comments about needing to overcome obstacles or strongholds in your own life, just reach out to crushingstrongholds.com and you can contact me there and or reach out to us at this episode. So, and don't forget to watch, like, and share. So, and if you know anybody that's dealing with addiction, please share this episode so they can also take that first step in finding that connection. So, thank you all. We appreciate you. We love you, and God bless you guys. Turn it off.